Sorry if you guys hear any snuffling. My dog is right down here, and we are on our third consecutive day of filming, and she has just been very patient, and I'm just gonna let her chill right where she is. So I'm where her bed usually is, and her bed had to shift slightly. Yeah, anyway. Sorry for any noises. This video is the second installment of a 7-part retrospective looking back on BBC Sherlock and TJLC. It is intended that you watch the entire series in order. There is an annotation in the top left to the playlist for A Better Story, so you can start at the beginning. While this retrospective is going to be quite long, it is actually a lot less thorough than part of me would like to be. But I think an in-depth analysis of BBC Sherlock at this point is sort of redundant. As I said at the start of the first video, this series is intended for people already familiar with TJLC. You know the evidence in favor. My goal isn't to convince you that TJLC is correct. What I want to do instead is remind you of the story as we told it, the moments that supported it, and the choices that don't make sense without it. I picked the title of this retrospective for multiple reasons, and this is one. To me, the TJLC reading of BBC Sherlock is a better story than you can find in the show otherwise. One that is intricate and detailed, and that I would still argue is deeply moving and profound, offering a message about identity and truth that resonated with an audience of queer people for a reason, even if it wasn't there intentionally. And I want to make that case, that the story we loved was worth loving. I do want to provide some insight into my actual thoughts on the show looking back on it now, though. So I'm going to start with a fairly detailed look at the first 20 minutes of Sherlock, because the potential romantic reading of this story goes deeper than the plot elements this retrospective is going to focus on. It even goes deeper than the symbolism we covered last time. It's structural. This show is built to ask questions about the way the home stories are viewed. It's all over the show. That seems to be why it exists. In my mind, there are two explanations for that. Either the show is raising those questions for their own sake, or when the writers said they wanted to correct everyone else, they meant that, and they are raising these questions to eventually lead the viewer to what they see as the correct answers. Let's look at the first 20 minutes of the show as a case study. BBC Sherlock opens as it should, as it must, with John Watson. We meet him at his lowest point. This is a fascinating place to begin because this version of John Watson is emotionally guarded to the extreme. We won't see him openly showing vulnerability like this again for a long time. So it's an intelligent choice to give us this peek behind the mask so early on, so that we, the audience, can connect with John and understand what's happening under the careful composure and anger. On a first viewing, you might assume it's memories of the war that are troubling him. But even before he says a word, the framing here, these wide isolated shots, the close-up on his gun, the blank text box on his blog, all give you some hints for his mental state. He feels empty, alone, and potentially suicidal. BBC Sherlock, for now at least, knows how to show, not tell. In his therapy session, we get explicit confirmation of what's really going on here.
You're a soldier. It's gonna take you a while to adjust to civilian life. And writing a blog about everything that happens to you will honestly help you.
Nothing happens to me.
John feels lost and without purpose. He wants something to happen to him. Between this and the framing, you can already pick up that he's not haunted by his time in the war. He misses it. But you have to be paying attention to get all of that information. Again, right off the bat, this show knows what it's doing, and seems to be inviting the audience to try to keep up. On the flip side of that, though, BBC Sherlock is prone to some silliness. I've always found this press conference scene a little strange. I've already alluded to the fact that there's this running thread on the show of the writers not being big fans of the press. That comes out here.
Daily Mail.
I think part of what's going on here too is that they're trying to build some anticipation for the moment you finally see Sherlock Holmes. They're hyping him up a bit. Those are both fine. But the specifics, question, how is Sherlock doing this? He never does anything else remotely like this at any other point. The answer seems to be, who cares? Does it matter? And no, not really. Not everything needs to be perfectly explained. What this is demonstrating fairly early on is that on Sherlock, logic takes second place to emotions and character. This is being done to make Sherlock himself a mystery that the audience has to solve, based on context clues. What can you learn? He's smart, interested in this crime, he's arrogant and dramatic, but also detached, and for some reason, he wants to stay out of the public eye. After all, coming to correct Lestrade in person would be a lot less less effort. So we learn a lot before we even see the character. And like with John, it's serving to prime the audience to look for clues about who Sherlock really is. But again, all of this is being achieved through a scenario that's a bit silly. So my point is that, for better or worse, this show has priorities that come before strict logic, which, if you're going into it expecting a straightforward detective story, already isn't boding well for you. We already know from the very first scene that the show isn't only interested in Sherlock Holmes as a character. It's equally about John Watson. Mark and Steven said as much themselves. This comes out in the very next scene, where John bumps into an old friend and is obviously hiding something.
And you couldn't bear to be anywhere else. That's not the John Watson I know.
No, not the John Watson.
These are the first iterations, but these are points BBC Sherlock is going to raise constantly. The show seems to be implying that no one really knows the real Sherlock Holmes or John Watson. If you were making a show to correct everyone else, that certainly has interesting implications. And the methods used to present different answers to these questions are likewise fascinating. Take a look at the scene where we finally see Sherlock.
I knew him. He was nice.
Fine. We'll start with the riding crop.
This scene is purposefully off-putting, but why is Sherlock beating a corpse?
Bad day, was it?
I need to know what Bruce is for in the next 20 minutes. A man's alibi depends on it. Text me.
Either he's trying to catch a killer or prove that a man is innocent. Off-putting action, noble motivations. Again, I find this element of Sherlock fascinating. It seems to masterfully play with contradictions between what we are led to believe is true about a character or situation and what is actually true. The show gives out a lot of conflicting information about the characters, and you have to be paying attention to piece together the truth. Reading into Sherlock's character, at least, is intended. Even as it stands now, the show is about disproving the read of Sherlock as an unfeeling machine, which is another interesting point. The surface level read of Sherlock's character on this show, the high-functioning sociopath, is almost a sort of parody on the way Holmes is read, taking the misconception of his character to this heightened extreme. And I'm left to wonder if that's deliberate, if this is a form of satire. It seems to be. They disprove this reading later, so they clearly don't think it's correct.
A sociopath, so fucking not, is a quote from you about Sherlock Holmes.
Well, it's funny how people are always wanting to prove me wrong in this one. They say, but he's not a high-functioning sociopath. I never said he was. Sherlock Holmes tells people he is. Yeah. Why would you listen to him? Nobody can define themselves. That's what he'd like people to think he is.
But that has some potentially far-reaching implications. It's also notable that the same technique seemingly at work on BBC Sherlock absolutely is present in the Holmes stories. The contradiction between what the characters say is true about themselves and what we are shown. Watson and Holmes claim that Holmes is an unemotional man, or that Watson doesn't contribute much. But if you're paying attention, it's blatantly obvious both are untrue. If this show was made because the writers think everyone else has been getting it wrong, these seem to be purposeful choices, that they're deliberately toying with the way people misunderstand the Holmes stories, and using the same techniques present there to eventually make a statement about who Sherlock Holmes and John Watson truly are. I'm not going to dance around the fact that what's being set up here is blatantly at odds with the ending of the final problem. You know it, and I know it, which is part of why that ending is going to feel so fundamentally wrong. It seems to fly in the face of the point of the show. Even the writers seem to get that.
And I think arguably, and we would argue quite strongly, that under the surface, that the detective stories are merely the surface. It's the story of the greatest friendship ever.
Absolutely.
It's subtext, but it really is right at the top layer of the subtext. It's just about those two men and the fact they adore each other.
Which is why I'm left with so many questions. Is this something they lost sight of along the way? Maybe. For now at least, the show seems to be about something. That if there's a mystery to be uncovered, it's the truth about these characters and who they are to each other. The characters are set up as mysteries for each other to solve too, right from their meeting. Of course, Sherlock is going to deduce anyone, but I do love that the first deduction we see him give, both in this story and the original Scarlet, is of John.
Afghanistan or Iraq?
Then who said anything about flatmates?
I did. Told Mike this morning that I must be a difficult man to find a flatmate for. And now here he is, just after lunch with an old friend, clearly just home from military service in Afghanistan. Wasn't a difficult leap.
Likewise, John is left with a lot of questions about who Sherlock is, and he goes home to research him. The first scene at Baker Street continues the pattern of offering rapid-fire contradictions about Sherlock. He's polite to John, but he's proud of getting a man executed.
Mr. Holmes.
Sherlock, please.
Mrs. Hudson, the landlady.
giving me a special deal. Owes me a favor. A few years back, her husband got himself sentenced to death in Florida. Sorry, you stopped her husband being executed? Oh, no, I ensured it.
But then again, that man's widow is thrilled to see him, so maybe that's a good thing, and he warmly embraces her.
Sherlock, look.
Mrs. Hudson, Dr. John Watson.
Hello. Come in.
Thank you.
Sherlock offers to tidy for John, but also calls a skull his friend.
Yes, I think so. My thoughts precisely. So I
As
went
soon as we
straight
get
ahead
all
and
this
moved in.
rubbish cleaned out. Oh. So this is all...
Well, obviously I can straighten things up a bit.
The skull.
Friend of mine. When I say friend.
This is something I really only noticed this last rewatch after writing From a Drop of Water. And once you've noticed this formula, it's impossible to ignore. It is constantly happening. And it isn't only applied to Sherlock's character. Nowhere are these contradictions more apparent than in the question the writers swear has never been asked.
What do you think then, Dr. Watson? There's another bedroom upstairs if you've been needing 2 bedrooms.
Of course we'll be needing 2.
And watch John's reaction.
Oh, don't worry, there's all sorts around here. Mrs. Turner next door's got married once.
Sherlock says nothing. In fact, he turns away so we can't see his reaction. John initially denies the implication, but he looks almost hopeful when he looks back at Sherlock. This is the third question that is going to come up constantly on BBC Sherlock. What is the nature of John and Sherlock's relationship? Could it be romantic? If it isn't being done to bait the audience, which I've argued that it's not, then it's here either because the writers find the question fascinating, but like Sherlock here, have no intention of definitively answering it, or they're raising it to eventually provide an answer. For now, I'll point out that Mrs. Hudson, who is close enough to Sherlock for him to feel comfortable hugging and kissing her, sees Sherlock bring a man around and assumes it's because he's Sherlock's boyfriend. She thinks Sherlock is gay. That's leaving aside the fact that Mrs. Turner is another name Doyle mistakenly gave to Mrs. Hudson in the stories. So if there is subtext happening here, Mrs. Turner housing a married gay couple is a choice.
And I would like to know if we are ever gonna see Mr. Turner marry Strand. You know, the couple who lives next to Holmes and Watson.
I have not prepped for that question. But I'll give you a boring detail. Because, as you know, Mark and I have no lives at all. We're just like uber geeks that people rashly give money to. We try and tie up bits of Conan Doyle continuity that don't work. In one of the stories, because he's very careless, he changes Mrs. Hudson's name by mistake. He changes from Mrs. Hudson to Mrs. Turner. So Mark and I worry about this kind of thing and how we can fix it. So we decide Mrs. Turner was the woman next door who took over landladying while Mrs. Hudson was ill. Yes, we do worry about these things.
Sherlock leaves to take a case, leaving John behind, and Mrs. Hudson tries to commiserate with him, but she's gotten John all wrong.
Him dashing about. My husband was just the same. You're more the sitting down type, I can tell. I'll make you that cuppa. You rest your leg.
Damn my leg! Sorry. I'm so sorry. It's just sometimes this bloody thing.
I wonder how this scene would read if we weren't introduced to John waking up from a nightmare and sobbing. If we would be more likely to wonder if John is a good man like we're led to do with Sherlock. Instead, because of that insight, John's conflict here is a different misconception about his character. People underestimating him. He likes adventure, he likes excitement, he's competent and capable and wants to be somewhere he can be useful, but people don't expect much from him. He's just a broken man who couldn't possibly keep up with Sherlock Holmes. Like the high-functioning sociopath facade for Sherlock, this seems like a pointed critique of the way Watson is viewed by general audiences. Mark and Stephen both alluded to this in that interview I read you so much of last time, that the two men are equals, that Watson is every bit as valuable as Holmes is. That, unequivocally, is part of what they wanted to correct, which is something else that seems fundamentally at odds with where the writers take things in Series 4. But here, at least, they know what they're doing. John isn't left there. Sherlock hears him shouting and comes back, offers to bring him along. He understands John, what John wants, what John needs, and wants to offer it to him. And it doesn't take much squinting to see this scene as a sort of seduction.
You're a doctor. In fact, you're an army doctor. Any good?
Very good.
Seen a lot of injuries then. Violent deaths. Want to see some more?
Oh, God, yes.
Like I said at the start of this section, these three questions are constantly intertwined. Who is Sherlock? Who is John? And what is the nature of their relationship? Almost as if to truly answer one, you have to answer all three. Sherlock and John go downstairs. We get another 1-2 punch of contradicting information about Sherlock when he calls impossible suicides fun before warmly kissing Mrs. Hudson on the cheek.
Possible suicides, 4 of them. There's no point sitting at home when there's finally something fun going on. Mwah!
She makes a comment about him not being decent, which, if you know anything about the Victorian period and indecency, is again suggestive. And Sherlock declares he doesn't care about being decent.
Look at you all happy. It's not decent.
Who cares about decent? The game, Mrs. Hudson, is on.
And I want to dive into that as the last thing before we move on to the more surface level retrospective. The game. It's a phrase Holmes uses constantly in the stories. The game is afoot. The game is up. The game is in my hands. The game is not over. I play the game for the game's own sake. I play my own idea of the game. What is the game? What is the game? For Holmes, uncovering the mystery. But because it's such a commonly used phrase in canon, Holmesians, throughout the years, have taken it and created a new game. As I already mentioned, the canon is filled with inconsistencies. Mrs. Hudson is Mrs. Turner. Mary Watson calls her husband James when we know his name is John. Watson was shot in the shoulder and the leg. That's just the beginning. Many dismiss these inconsistencies as carelessness. Doyle was infamously frustrated that Holmes was his most well-known work, so maybe he just didn't care enough to be consistent. But we already know that's not how Mark and Stephen read it. They think he was clever and deliberate, that he didn't do anything by accident. They aren't alone in that. There are Holmes fans that take the inconsistencies, the discrepancies, and try to find the truth beneath. With this approach, the reader acts as if the inconsistencies aren't mistakes on Doyle's part. They're put there by Watson. It's just a matter of figuring out what he's hiding. This approach to the Holmes stories has several names, all of them similar. The Holmesian game, the Sherlockian game, the one you'll know, the Great Game, and sometimes it's just called the game itself. For Holmes fans, the game is finding the true story. So if you were a Holmes fan who played the game, and your conclusion after playing was that the thing at the heart of the stories that Doyle is so carefully, deliberately, purposefully concealing has to do with the relationship of Holmes and Watson, after years bemoaning the fact that someone someday is going to tell the Holmes stories the way you think they should be told before you do, you're given the chance to tell your version, to bring Holmes into the modern day, and to correct everyone else. You start your show raising 3 central questions. Who is Sherlock Holmes? Who is John Watson, and what was their relationship to one another? You provide some answers to these questions, some hints at the truth. That Sherlock is a warm, kind man underneath the mask, that John is equal to Sherlock in every way. And for the third, well, you don't answer that question yet. Unless you count the bit about Mrs. Turner's married ones that you sneak in under the radar, because no one but the most dedicated Holmes fans will pick up the reference, and even they will probably miss the implication. But you also hide the clear answers with conflicting information. You, like Doyle, aren't doing anything by accident. You are writing your story carefully and deliberately to make an intentional point. What you're doing is offering your audience the chance to play the game, to figure out the same truth you did by turning the wrong answers into a parody of themselves, to set things up so that your preferred answers seem like the only reasonable conclusions. This particular iteration of the game is more indecent than other takes on it, but who cares about that in 2010? You can have all sorts these days. Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, after low, seductive murmurs and exclamations of "oh God, yes," are off on their first adventure, and the game is on. If you were setting out to play an elaborate long game, putting yourself in Doyle's shoes and doing what he couldn't because of the time in which he lived, if you plan to finally answer the real question that encapsulated the 3 smaller ones, that question being, what were the Holmes stories truly about, with a romance? Sherlock Holmes and John Watson love each other. They adore each other. It's all about their love for one another. If you were a Holmes fan and you wanted to make that reveal in full Holmesian fashion and turn it into the mystery at the heart of your story, I cannot think of a better way to establish that than these first 20 minutes. Does that mean that's what's being done? No. And I will remind you, they say it's not. But these are the things I think about when watching the show. The ways that this reading isn't just a few symbols, and it isn't just a handful of jokes or suggestive lines. These are the questions that come up over and over and over again, that are at the very heart of the show. I've already said I think it's possible that's happening, because to these writers, asking the question is the fun bit, not the answer. But it seems like it goes beyond that they're asking the questions so that you will notice and try to answer them. In light of that, even if it's not the correct answer, the intended answer, it does seem reasonable to look at the question being asked, who are Sherlock and John and who are they to each other, and answer, two men in love. It seems like a natural conclusion to draw, even if they didn't want that question answered at all. So if throughout this video I refer to the idea that the writers might be purposefully satirizing these mischaracterizations of Holmes and Watson, that Sherlock is emotionless and John is useless, of them deliberately playing up the more ridiculous ways the Holmes stories have been misunderstood, of them asking three questions that seem to be the same question, of them playing a game with their audience, this is what I mean. Hints of these things are present from the start, and they're present throughout, intended or not. But as promised, I'm going to ease off the throttle now. We're going to focus less on analysis and more on the vibes of the show. And boy oh boy does BBC Sherlock have some vibes. A Study in Pink is the story of how Sherlock Holmes and John Watson met and fell in love at first sight. In spite of some of what I just said in that last section, I'm really not trying to make the case that that's the intended reading from the writer's standpoint, though I will be asking questions about their intent throughout, because that's a big part of what analysis is for me. My real goal is to make the case that watching the show this way leads to a good story, a better, more cohesive one than you'll find otherwise. We've already covered Sherlock and John's meeting, so let's follow them to their first case. On the way there, John wants to know a bit more about Sherlock, and Sherlock explains just what it is that he does.
Okay, you've got questions.
Yeah, where are we going?
Crime scene. Next.
Who are you? What do you do?
I told you those questions are everywhere. Sherlock gives John a bit of a demonstration of what he does, and John is fascinated, which catches Sherlock off guard.
That was amazing.
You think so?
Of course it was. It was extraordinary. It was quite extraordinary.
That's not what people normally say.
What do people normally say?
Piss off.
Just as Sherlock saw through to the real John and invited him along for the adventure, John is the first person to see past what Sherlock does and call him amazing. Other people don't like Sherlock so much, though. Of course, we already know why. Sherlock told us. People think his talents make him a freak. But because we're given the answer before the question, we're left wondering if these people might have a justified reason to hate Sherlock.
Freak's here, bringing him in.
It's a crime scene. I don't want it contaminated. Are we clear on that?
Quite clear.
Inside, Greg Lestrade asks who John is, and Sherlock doesn't answer apart from saying,
Who's this?
He's with me.
But who is he?
I said he's with me.
Again, those questions are constantly being intertwined. Upstairs, we get more contrast between the way John reacts to Sherlock and the way other people do.
Oh, for God's sake, if you're just making this up.
It's brilliant. Sorry. It's fantastic.
Do you know you do that out loud?
Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it's fine.
Sherlock still seems shocked that John actually likes him, but any hints of that budding warmth between the two are overshadowed when Sherlock abandons John at the crime scene. Again, once you notice this formula of contradicting information, it's a bit like seeing Matrix code. Donovan stops John as he leaves and again asks who he is and who he is to Sherlock.
But you're not his friend. He doesn't have friends. So who are you?
I'm nobody. I just met him.
Sally then goes on to give John and the audience her interpretation of who Sherlock is.
He likes it. He gets off on it. One day we'll be standing around a body and Sherlock Holmes will be the one that put it there.
Again, these questions come up constantly. That theme continues when John gets kidnapped, although he's seemingly unimpressed by the theatrics.
You don't seem very afraid.
You don't seem very frightening.
He does love to be dramatic.
Well, thank God you're above all that.
Mycroft, played by co-creator Mark Gatiss, already knows who Sherlock is, and he already knows a lot about who John is. His only remaining question...
What is your connection to Sherlock Holmes?
I don't have one. I barely know him. I met him yesterday.
And since yesterday you've moved in with him and now you're solving crimes together. Might we expect a happy announcement by the end of the week?
And there it is again. Not only does Sherlock's brother seem to think he's attracted to men, this is literally the writer asking the question that at this point is starting to look more and more like a theme. What is the connection between Sherlock Holmes and John Watson? Will it end in a happy announcement? Here, John doesn't answer.
Who are you?
An interested party.
Oh, are you? I will acknowledge that maybe you aren't supposed to read everything Mycroft says and does as being literally what the writers are saying, but at this point I'm incapable of doing otherwise. It just adds so much to the story. So the fascinating thing is that this scene seems to exist because this version of John is so emotionally closed off that the writers needed to step in and explain for the audience exactly what his deal is. How the way John is acting around Sherlock is unusual for him.
You're very loyal very quickly.
No, I'm not. I'm just not interested.
Trust issues. says here. Could it be that you've decided to trust Sherlock Holmes of all people?
Who says I trust him?
You don't seem the kind to make friends easily.
And how Sherlock is exactly what he needs to be fulfilled.
When you walk with Sherlock Holmes, you see the battlefield. You've seen it already, haven't you? You're not haunted by the war, Dr. Watson. You miss it. Welcome back.
He even has a handy-dandy notebook full of character notes. I mean research. But going by the formula, this is all a bit too much evidence in favor of Sherlock and John belonging together. So of course, John flirts with Anthea on the car ride back.
Hey, do you ever get any free time?
But we follow that up with John walking in on this.
What are you doing?
Do you see what I'm saying yet about these juxtapositions feeling deliberate? Like the show is trying to make you feel constantly disoriented and not knowing what to believe. If that's on purpose, it's being masterfully done. Sherlock invites John to come with him on another part of the investigation. And if you're reading between the lines, it's obvious that him inviting John along isn't normal behavior for him either.
Have you talked to the police?
4 people are dead. There isn't time to talk to the police.
So why are you talking to me?
Mrs. Hudson took my skull.
Well, you want me to come with you?
I like company when I go out, and I think better when I talk aloud. Skull just attracts attention, so...
The attraction here is mutual. Sherlock wants John there just as much as John wants to be there. While John doesn't seem to think Sherlock is a bad person, he does hesitate before following him, and brings up part of Sally's statement, the bit that seems to have bothered him the most. We see maybe he's projecting a bit here.
She said, you get off on this, you enjoy it.
And I said dangerous, and here you are.
Damn it.
So here the show is making an explicit connection to Sherlock and John's adventures and getting off, and neither character denies it. This isn't being used to prove Sherlock is a sociopath, but to reveal something about both Sherlock and John and why they work together so well. They both get off on the same things. And what do we get after that but the scene at Angelo's? Here we meet yet another person who believes Sherlock is gay. Sherlock doesn't correct him, but John does.
Anything on the menu, whatever you want, free, on the house for you and for your date.
Do you want to eat?
I'm not his date.
Again, the juxtaposition game. They get off on it, it's not a date. Unless John finally broaches the subject with Sherlock. You might remember the interpretation that when characters use the word people, they mean John. That adds a bit to this line.
What do real people have, then, in their real lives?
Friends? No, people they know, people they like, people they don't like. Girlfriends, boyfriends.
Sherlock calls all that dull, and John asks about Sherlock.
You don't have a girlfriend, then?
Girlfriend? No, not really my area.
And at this point, John makes the same assumption everyone else he's met so far has made about Sherlock.
Do you have a boyfriend?
Girlfriend? Sherlock is quick to say that's not his area. Boyfriend? He doesn't answer as quickly. John reassures him that having a boyfriend is fine. Sherlock says he already knows that, but no, he doesn't have a boyfriend.
Which is fine, by the way.
I know it's fine.
So you've got a boyfriend?
No.
If I was watching this assuming nothing was being done by accident, this would all seem like very carefully selected wording to me. And watch John's reaction.
Right, okay. You're unattached. Like me. Fine. Good.
But if Sherlock isn't used to people liking him at all, it makes sense he would panic. Even then, he makes it a point to say that he's flattered.
John, I think you should know that I consider myself married to my work, and while I'm flattered by your interest, I'm really not looking for anything.
No, I'm not asking. No, I'm just saying it's all fine.
Glad we established that early. Sherlock and John go on a daring chase and have the time of their lives.
That was ridiculous. That was the most ridiculous thing I've ever done.
And you invaded Afghanistan.
Angelo shows up with John's cane, and if you've read my take on Series 4, you know that this is the moment I think John realizes that what he feels for Sherlock goes deeper than attraction. It's the only thing that makes sense of his actions for the rest of this episode. Again though, our formula. We've had too many consecutive minutes of Sherlock and John being together feeling natural and right, so the show has to lean as far in the other direction as possible. The police are inside. John learns Sherlock is a former drug user.
No. What? You. Shut up.
His coworkers call him a psychopath, and his correction is far from comforting.
And we found it in the hands of our favourite psychopath.
I'm not a psychopath, Anderson. I'm a high-functioning sociopath. Do your research.
As I said before, presenting Sherlock Holmes as a high-functioning sociopath reads as a deliberate parody of people calling Holmes emotionless or cold. We know that the writers ultimately don't believe this is true, at least. So it's fascinating that this is a conversation that comes up so often. It seems like pointed commentary, which again again makes me wonder about the other things that can be read that way. Sherlock leaves with the killer, his desire to understand how something was done overriding his sense of self-preservation. As the police upstairs watch him go, we get a fascinating conversation between John and Lestrade.
Why did he do that? Why did he have to leave? You know him better than I do.
I've known him for 5 years and no, I don't.
Lestrade is right. In some ways, John already seems to know Sherlock better than anyone else. John asks Lestrade why he bothers with Sherlock at all, and Lestrade explicitly states one of the central ideas of the show.
Because Sherlock Holmes is a great man, and I think one day, if we're very, very lucky, he might even be a good one.
I think I've already made the case that Sherlock already is a good man at this point, but it goes deeper. We all know Holmes first and foremost for the legend. Will this story reveal the man behind it? Will we see the goodness underneath the greatness? This speculation about Sherlock's character is intercut with Sherlock and the cabbie, talking about how he already knew who Sherlock was.
Who would notice me?
Got yourself a fan.
And those fans of Sherlock Holmes, the ones associated with the idea that all Sherlock cares about is the puzzle, focused on his greatness and not his goodness, are already being cast as villains. Again, if the show were trying to make a point with that, it would be doing it very well. The Cabbie's game is a change from the original story, where it was a pure game of chance and Hope left his fate in the hands of God. Sidebar, Hope in the canon couldn't be with the person he loved due to religious persecution, and he was on a righteous quest for revenge. A significant portion of the first Holmes novel is dedicated to his tragic backstory and him not being able to be with the person he loved. And I love the implications. I see you, Arthur. Here, though, it's different. It's all about how the cabbie thinks, trying to understand his intent.
I want your best game. Ready to play?
Play what? It's a 50-50 chance.
You're not playing the numbers, you're playing me. Is it a bluff? Or a double bluff? Or a triple bluff?
Sherlock seems to know that to understand how someone thinks, you need to know what's at their heart.
Time to play.
Oh, I am playing. This is my turn. You didn't just kill 4 people because you're bitter. Bitterness is a paralytic. Love is a much more vicious motivator.
This is another idea that seems to run throughout Sherlock, the things someone will do for love. And what specific phrase is used for this scenario where Sherlock needs to figure out the cabbie's motivations?
Come on. Play the game.
Of course. And it's an effective lure. We all know how tempting it is to believe that you've seen through someone's facade, that you understand their intent in spite of their attempts to deceive you. This episode reminds us that this is a dangerous game to play.
Well, what's the point of being clever if you can't prove it? Still the addict. But this is what you're really addicted to.
And we don't get to know if Sherlock correctly assessed the cabbie's motivations. John saves him first. I want to point out how bananas this is. John has known Sherlock for a day at this point, has spent maybe 4 hours with him, and already he was willing to kill a man to keep him safe. That's a little intense. Why would he do that? I mean, what were we literally just told is the most vicious motivator. Here, Sherlock gets to the heart of who John Watson is.
I didn't find until I was in immediate danger, though. It's a strong moral principle. You're looking for a man probably with a history of military service, nerves of steel.
John Watson is not nobody. He is not inferior to Sherlock. He is as talented and remarkable as he is, in the exact ways Sherlock needs. A perfect complement to him. He's already saved Sherlock's life. Sherlock here seems to have a change of heart. He approaches John, and there's this sort of tense undercurrent, neither really wanting to point out how big of a deal that just was.
Good shot. Yes. Yes, must have been. Through that window. Well, you'd know.
But all the same, they still get along beautifully.
Should have seen the route he took us to get here.
Stop. So we can't giggle, it's a crime scene. Stop it.
You're the one who shot him, don't mind me.
John calls out Sherlock for going to take the pill, and Sherlock, thinking John sees through to the real him, asks him out for dinner.
That's how you get your kicks, isn't it? You risk your life to prove you're clever.
Why would I do that?
Because you're an idiot.
Dinner?
Starving.
If anything would get you to change your mind about being married to your work, it would be a man swooping in to save your life. But of course, John doesn't know that. He thinks Sherlock has made it perfectly clear he's not interested. We end the episode with Mycroft coming back. The show is still trying to misdirect you that Mycroft is Moriarty at first, but the reveal of who he is just makes this dynamic more interesting.
It never occurred to you that you and I belong on the same side?
Oddly enough, no. This is my brother, Mycroft.
I'm just saying the writers getting their audience to wonder whether the character played by one of them is the main villain has fascinating implications. Are the writers the villain? Or are we on the same side? If you're into M theory, you already know that the most interesting answer to that question is more complicated than that. Like I said, John doesn't know Sherlock changed his mind, so it would make sense that he tries to divert his romantic interest as soon as possible. It's notable that his flirting here looks a lot like the Angelo's scene.
Right, okay.
Yes, we met earlier on this evening.
No, I'm not asking. No.
Oh.
Okay, good night.
As Sherlock and John leave, we get one final scene of Mycroft. The writers have admitted that this line, at least, was given to Mark because they felt like it was obviously them talking.
It's a thrilling moment, and you get to say it.
Oh, it was Rupert, and then when we did this version, you said, well, it's clearly the writers talking.
So should be, yeah.
So Mark practically looks into the camera and says, "Hey, keep an eye on Sherlock and John. This story is all about their relationship and where they'll go."
Interesting, that soldier fellow. It could be the making of my brother. Or make him worse than ever. Either way, we'd better upgrade their surveillance status. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
And that's just the first episode. This is where we start. Where can the show possibly go from here? In order to understand what's going on in The Blind Banker, you have to do a bit of background reading. Or do you? Series 4 of BBC Sherlock is going to seriously bring into question both how much you're meant to pay attention to details and how canonical the blogs that were created to go along with the show really are. We're going to talk about that quite a bit when we get to Series 4. But for now, I'm going to use the information you can learn on the websites as part of this story, and there are links below for how you can still access them. After meeting Sherlock, John goes on his blog, which up to that point had only been him complaining about how nothing ever happens to him and how things happen to other people, things like getting married, for example. But on January 29th, John reports something finally happened to him. Sherlock, who he describes, among other things, as being mad, strangely likable, and charming. The first two comments, John's sister asking what's going on, and his closest friend before this point asking if John has gone gay. After the case, he writes another post calling Sherlock fascinating, arrogant, imperious, pompous, and not safe. And we already know how John feels about danger and dangerous people. Over on Sherlock's website, Mike congratulates Sherlock on moving in with John. Sherlock asks how Mike knew, and Mike directs Sherlock to John's blog. Sherlock laughs at John's descriptions of him, but states he isn't going to tell John he knows about the blog. He's just going to see how long it takes him to notice. And how does he hint? Well, if Sherlock asked John out at the end of A Study in Pink, but John seems to be under the contradicting impressions that Sherlock is an unfeeling machine and also an oblivious child, he can just adjust his behavior. Make sure John knows he's aware, available, and interested. He wants to take things slowly, to make it into a game. Sherlock begins turning down cases and focuses on getting John to figure him out. How thematically appropriate. We open with Sue Lin, a woman obsessed with the work of restoring her teapots, and Andy, a man who doesn't quite understand her work, but is attracted to her passion.
Do you want to have a drink? Not tea, obviously. In a pub with me.
Sue Lin turns him down. She says it's because she's worried he won't like her, but she has deeper reasons to be afraid to let someone close to her. That night, alone in the museum, Sue Lin is left a message, and we close the scene on her horrified expression. So her fear about entering a relationship is seemingly justified. In the context of what we read on the websites, starting the episode with this plot does seem rather fitting. We begin the episode proper, cutting between Sherlock and John, having two very different struggles. Sherlock fighting off an attacker, and John trying to get through the grocery store in one piece. If you're primed to look for commentary on Holmes and Watson as characters, you might see this as Sherlock and John engaged in their unique character conflicts. Sherlock tries to get away from cases so he can focus on John, turning down the brain to focus on the heart, and John trying to fit back into civilian life to no success, because that's not who he really is, but he already believes he can't have the life he really wants. Sherlock is married to his work. When John gets back, we see firsthand that Sherlock and John are having a total disconnect.
You had a row with a machine?
Sort of. It sat there and I shouted abuse. Have you got cash?
Take my card.
You could always go yourself. You know, you've been sitting there all morning. You're not even moved since I left.
We aren't ever offered a reason why this is happening. Sherlock here seems far more polite and warm than he normally does, already notable. The only thing that makes sense of it is the background context you can pick up on the blogs. John returns with the groceries, still angry for no discernible reason, and he finds Sherlock using his things.
Is that my computer?
Of course.
What?
Mine was in the bedroom.
Right, thank you.
because Sherlock doesn't seem to think that their relationship should have that kind of boundary. John can use Sherlock's credit card, and Sherlock can use John's laptop. That's all fine, which makes sense if he thinks they're kind of dating, or are about to be. John continues to complain about money, so Sherlock leads John on a new case, and seems eager to introduce John to this man he knows from school. But
This is my friend, John Watson.
Friend?
Colleague.
so we're still getting this question. Who are Sherlock and John to each other? Friends? Colleagues? Something else? Again, we don't really get a reason why John would correct Sebastian here, unless he is viciously trying to remind himself to remain emotionally distant from Sherlock, that Sherlock wants him around for their work first and foremost. Maybe this is another way of the show reminding us that John wants to be seen as an equal to Sherlock as well, because he is. But we see here that Sherlock and John are having conflicting ideas about what their relationship is. John even laughs along a bit with Sebastian's mockery here.
Put the wind up, everybody. We hated him. You come down to breakfast in the formal hall, and this freak would know you'd been shagging the previous night. You tell me there was a stain on my tie from some special kind of ketchup you can only buy in Manhattan.
No,
Although he seems to second guess himself when Sherlock passes up an opportunity to show off.
I was just chatting with your secretary outside. She told me.
But the damage is already done. At the crime scene, Sherlock goes in alone and ignores John's attempts to get through to him.
Sherlock! Sherlock, you okay? Yeah, anytime you feel like letting me in.
The locked room metaphor is not particularly subtle. The disconnect continues, so a bit later we see John out applying for a job, probably feeling like he needs to get some more distance from Sherlock after being shut out at the crime scene. But this woman also seems interested in him, and John is flattered.
Might be a bit mundane for you.
No, mundane is good sometimes.
Anything else you can do?
Learned the clarinet at school.
Oh, I look forward to it.
Which Sherlock notices and seems annoyed about.
She's great.
Who?
The job.
She?
It.
So that might be part of why he just runs off when they're confronted by the police, leading to John getting arrested. Here we briefly cut back to the museum plot, with Andy asking questions about Su Lin's whereabouts, and his boss hints that he might have driven Su Lin away. The cutaways to speculation about where Su Lin and Andy's relationship went wrong does seem to tie into what's happening with Sherlock and John fairly well. That point gets made even more clearly when we get another locked room scenario that is excruciating if you're reading mirrors into it. Sherlock is being strangled in his mirror's home by his brother's mirror. He's crying for John's help, but John can't hear him, and assumes Sherlock isn't letting him in because he thinks John is too slow to keep up with him.
No, I'm Sherlock Holmes and I always work alone because no one else can compete with my massive intellect.
Even without the mirrors, this scene is bringing up those central questions. Can John keep up with Sherlock? Does Sherlock respect him? Or is he too above it all? And ultimately, again, why are all of these miscommunications happening? Regardless of why, Sherlock refuses to tell John what just happened.
The milk's gone off and the washing started to smell. Somebody left here in a hurry 3 days ago.
You've gone all croaky. You're getting a cold.
Fine.
Can they please just talk like normal people? No? Okay. When they get a lead on the yellow paint that night, John is the one to find the message they're looking for.
Answer your phone, I've been calling you.
Except when they get there, the message has already been covered. Sherlock's technique to get John to remember it is interesting.
Sherlock, what are you
John, concentrate. I need you to concentrate. Close your eyes.
doing? What? Why? Why? What are you doing?
Again, if Sherlock were under the impression that he and John are sort of dating and is trying to get John to catch on to that, this makes sense. He's never touchy like this with anyone else apart from Mrs. Hudson, and after this episode, he's never touchy with John like this again. On the flip side, this convinces John that Sherlock is oblivious and just doesn't seem to care about normal boundaries, because he thinks Sherlock has already clearly turned him down. He's being so irritable because he's a powder keg of frustration. And all of this is happening while Sherlock continues to leave him out of cases, the only thing he was sure Sherlock wanted him around for. Back on the case, Sherlock eventually discovers that Su Lin is still sneaking into the museum, risking her life to continue her restoration work.
Fancy a biscuit with that? Centuries old. Don't want to break that.
The blind banker is taking some obvious inspiration from the novel The Valley of Fear, most notably with the code in a book that anyone would own, and in the people branded by a secret society. The blind banker is all about codes.
The world's run on codes and ciphers, John. Cryptography inhabits our every waking moment.
Yes, okay,
But it's all computer-generated, electronic codes, electronic ciphering methods. This is different. It's an ancient device.
Which would be an interesting statement to include if your show really was built on codes. The most interesting thing about using the Valley of Fear is the potential messaging it sets up. I won't spoil it for you in this video, but the Valley of Fear has a lengthy flashback section that makes up the back half of the novel. Towards the end of that section, we meet Bertie Edwards, who has been working in secret to take down the organization terrorizing the town where the story takes place. Here's part of his speech from when he finally succeeds. "I had a hard and dangerous game to play. Not a soul, not one soul, not my nearest and dearest knew I was playing it. But it's over tonight, thank God, and I am the winner." In part 1, I mentioned that you can potentially see these teapots as a stand-in for the home stories. Artifacts of cultural significance that aren't meant to sit behind glass. They're meant to be handled and retold, used to make tea, kind of like The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes did.
Some things aren't supposed to sit behind glass. They're made to be touched, to be handled.
You mean you and Dr. Watson? He is your glass of tea?
If you want to be picturesque about it.
Well, I can't see how a tiny splash of tea is going to help.
Sometimes you have to look hard at something to see its value.
Although it's difficult to say what's your definitive favourite film, it's probably my favourite film. I think it sort of does everything I want a film to do. I saw it when I was very young and it profoundly affected me. I think it's both a brilliant, respectful homage to Conan Doyle and yet an incredibly irreverent take on it. The parody is so sublime, but at its heart, it's deeply touching.
So you could perhaps tie Sulin's obsession with restoring these teapots, even at the risk of her own life, back to the idea of someone playing a long and dangerous game that not one soul can know they're playing. Unless you think you're correcting everyone else, you shouldn't be doing something. You should be saying, now this is the way it should be done. The other thing we must mention, because it's absolutely key for us, is the Billy Wilder film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, which is a masterpiece and, in so many ways, is tonally what we're trying to do. There are a lot of things that we've taken from that, and we can't say what they all are. That this is a subtle hint that the show is out to pull a Bertie Edwards. There's work to be done in secret, including ugly work, but all of it is being done in service of an ultimate victory, when they finally win the game. Valley of Fear will come up again on the show in places that support this reading of it, and I'll go over all of that in the final video in this retrospective. A bit later, we get a scene with Molly Hooper, who Sherlock manipulates into helping him by flirting with her.
Changed your hair.
What?
No, it's good. It suits you better this way.
I failed to mention earlier that Molly was also given a website. She actually met Sherlock the day before John did, and her description of their meeting is remarkably similar to John's entry, though quite a bit more direct. "Do you believe in love at first sight? There's this man, and I love him. At least, I think I do. I can't stop thinking about him. He's so intelligent, it's like he's burning. And he's so cool, but not really. And he's fit. Oh, he's really fit. And I can't stop thinking about him. I'm a sensible girl. I always have been. I've worked hard to get the job I have, and I've got plans. But he just rides all over everything. It's like I'm Molly Hooper, in control. Little Miss Perfect, as my mates call me. Until he walks into the room, and then suddenly I'm this little mouse. He turns me into a mouse." After this scene, Molly writes that she knows Sherlock is manipulating her, flirting with her to get what he wants, but she lets him anyway. I've already referred to the idea of John and Molly as potential mirrors, so keep this idea of Molly being aware that Sherlock knows how she feels and is coldly using it to his advantage in mind. Sherlock and John continue their work. John stays up all night with Sherlock, and he's so worn out that he falls asleep on his first day on the job. So yeah, maybe Sarah had a point about it being a bit too mundane for him. Still, she doesn't seem upset about it. She seems more worried about who he might have been staying up for.
Oh, she likes books, does she, your girlfriend?
John is quick to correct the assumption, and then asks her out, and shockingly, it works.
No, it wasn't a date.
Good.
And I don't have one tonight.
John goes back to 221B. Sherlock says he wants to go out for the evening, and John says he's busy. Sherlock is taken aback.
I need to get some air. We're going out tonight.
Actually, I've got a date.
What?
To where two people who like each other go out and have fun.
John assumes Sherlock doesn't understand the concept of a date, which is telling on his end, but I think it's more likely that Sherlock is confused that John has a date with someone else. That explains his response.
That's what I was suggesting.
Is this a joke? John seems to think so, or at least hope so.
No, it wasn't. At least I hope not.
Why? At least, why if you were reading this as a romance? Well, Cherchez le miroir. Molly thinks Sherlock is flirting with her just to get her to do what he wants. Here's John in a nearly identical shirt, perhaps afraid of the same. Sherlock gives John the idea to go to the circus, somehow knowing John will take his advice. Probably because he knows John is anything but boring and predictable. And Sherlock crashes the date.
Actually, I have 3 in that name.
I'm Sherlock.
Hi. John is furious. He wants some space from Sherlock for one reason, and one reason only.
What's so important? Sherlock, I'm right in the middle of a date. You want me to chase some killer while I'm trying to get off with Sarah?
He doesn't seem to care about Sarah much. He just wants to get off. Where have I already heard that phrase?
You get off on this, you enjoy it. And I said dangerous, and here you are.
I wonder why John is so frustrated at Sherlock, who apparently knows nothing about sex or romance or normal boundaries, except he's simultaneously using John's attraction against him, and wants a bit of time away from him so he can have an outlet for his sexual desires. What could possibly be going on there? Sherlock continues to capture John's attention throughout this date, and we see he is very annoyed by Sarah.
You and John, you solve puzzles for a living.
Consulting detective.
Again, I wonder why that might be. Sarah and John get kidnapped, and this is honestly the most interesting scene of the episode if you're reading mirrors into it. The final conflict here is a Mycroft mirror and a Moriarty mirror kidnapping who they believe are Sherlock Holmes and his romantic interest.
Chinese proverb, Mr. Holmes.
I'm not Sherlock Holmes.
They try to get Sherlock to do what they want by threatening to stake his lover through the heart.
Sherlock Holmes, pretty companion in a death-defying act. You've seen the act before. How dull for you. You know how it ends.
If you've read From a Drop of Water, let's just say I think this scenario has some potential. But of course the Black Lotus have it wrong. Who can blame them, really? John and Sherlock are already so inseparable that they're practically indistinguishable.
Debit card, name of S. Holmes.
Take my card.
The check for £5,000 made out in the name of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Tickets from the theater collected by you, name of Holmes.
Yes, sir.
Who is Sherlock Holmes? Apparently the answer is so tied up with John Watson that it's impossible to separate the two. Sherlock does find them and saves the day, trying extra hard to come across as suave, which would make sense if John saving his life was the thing that made Sherlock realize his feelings for him, and he's trying to produce a similar effect, but it doesn't quite land.
How would you describe me, John? Resourceful, dynamic, enigmatic?
Late?
And John still ends the evening with Sarah.
Don't worry. Next date won't be like this.
Again, the contradictory points back to back. Sherlock and John are so inextricably linked that you can't have one without the other? No, of course John is going to leave with his girlfriend. Of course Sherlock is going to end up alone. The episode ends with Sherlock and John talking about codes, about how they've only scratched the surface, that there's so much more out there yet to find.
No. I cracked this code. All the smugglers have to do is pick up another book.
If Valley of Fear were being introduced this early as part of a potential commentary, this would have some fascinating implications. We cut back to General Shan being murdered on the orders of a mysterious M, and that's where the episode ends.
I will not reveal your identity.
I love this episode. It is my second favorite on the show. A lot of that boils down to the fact that I adore Moriarty as a villain. I think he's fantastic and one of the best things about the show. To me, this story works best when it's explicitly about Sherlock and John facing Moriarty. That's part of why the final problem we got was such a big disappointment to me. I can imagine a world where John Locke didn't happen, but they made good on all of the Moriarty plot stuff, and I think I would have actually liked that version still. But that's the thing. To really make good on the Moriarty plot, you kind of have to go somewhere with John and Sherlock's relationship. For Moriarty's actions to make any sense, you have to be reading between the lines quite a bit. From Sherlock's website, we know that Moriarty was already sending Sherlock messages before he even met John, that he's flirting with Sherlock in those messages, that he's angry that Sherlock is ignoring his advances, and that's what launches the events of this episode into action. Basically, I'm saying for Moriarty to make sense, you have to think he wants Sherlock to be his boyfriend. That's M theory, babes. If your show was about correcting everyone else, introducing an overarching antagonist who is an obsessed, delusional Holmes fan with an unhealthy obsession is such blatant shade that it's delicious. And if you wrote a finale that was all about uncovering Sherlock's heart and his battle against an evil fan who is misunderstanding him, what else could you call that episode but the great game. And that's to say nothing of the potential power play already happening between Mycroft and Moriarty. Remember that ambiguous M at the end of The Blind Banker? I think you're sort of meant to wonder which M it is. The writers already tricked you once, making you think you had met Moriarty when you had only met Mycroft. I still think it would be quite a satisfying twist if they eventually revealed they really had been linked together all along. Mark Gatiss, at least, is aware of this idea.
I mean, Christopher Lee's Mycroft, though, is directly why my Mycroft is like that, because it felt to us that what Wilder was doing was taking a sort of one-joke character and making it more sophisticated.
I've read somewhere, and I could be wrong, but Alan Moore in Extraordinary League of Gentlemen has him as M, Bond's boss, doesn't he?
Yes, it's clever, isn't it? I mean, well, it's brilliant. That's the film wasn't. And the idea of M being Mycroft being / Moriarty and everything, it's really wonderfully done there.
We start the episode with Sherlock throwing a massive fit, tellingly waiting until he hears John coming in to begin shooting the wall. Why?
What the hell are you doing?
Bored.
Really, he's bored. Sherlock brings up John's blog.
So you've written up the taxi driver case?
Yes. Did you like it?
No.
Which you already know he found weeks ago. In fact, if you've kept up with your homework, you know Sherlock returned to John's blog to leave disparaging comments claiming to have just found it, and he complained in the comments section on A Study in Pink about how John made it sound like a romantic adventure. Sherlock and John fight about the way John described him.
Sherlock sees through everything and everyone in seconds. What's incredible, though, is how spectacularly ignorant he is about some things.
Now, hang on a minute. I didn't mean that in a...
Oh, you meant spectacularly ignorant in a nice way.
And Sherlock claims not to care about that, or what anyone thinks about him.
All that matters to me is the work. Without that, my brain rots.
Put that in your blog. Or better still, stop inflicting your opinions on the world.
It seems to me that the real problem Sherlock is dealing with here isn't boredom, it's jealousy. He sadly watches John walk away and then complains about being bored some more.
Look at that, Mrs. Hudson. Quiet, calm, peaceful. Isn't it hateful?
This is not particularly subtle. Of course, then the house across the street explodes. John spends the night on Sarah's sofa.
Well, maybe next time I'll let you keep at the end of my bed, you know.
Very important for us to know that John and Sarah aren't having sex yet, but he runs back as soon as he sees the news of the explosion. There he finds Sherlock and Mycroft in a sort of standoff.
Well, you don't need to know about that, do you?
Oh, hi, Mark. It's especially appropriate that Mark is the one to deliver this case, actually, because the Andrew West case is based heavily on the adventure of the Bruce Partington plans, Mark's favorite home story. My favorite is The Adventure of the Bruce Partington Plans. It's a late story, but it's a marvelous story. It's every bit as good as the early ones. I love it. It's a brilliant deduction. It's got the London Tube in it. It's kind of got everything for me. It's a dark, stormy one, stolen submarine plans, German agents. It's got the lot. German spies and submarine plans? Why does that sound familiar?
I think you're testing some sort of underwater craft. Camouflage to mislead the gullible.
Your client isn't Madame Valadon. It's the Imperial German government.
Is Mark saying the Bruce Partington plans is his favorite just another way of saying Private Life is his favorite?
In a very particular Billy Wilder way, he wanted to do something with it. I think that's the key to it. He didn't just want to do a straight adaptation. So, as you'll see, each part of it certainly resonates from the original, and one of the main story is sort of based on the Bruce Partington plans, but only very tangentially.
Oh, but of course, Bruce Partington plans also has trains. Mark loves trains. That's going to sound out of nowhere right now, but trust me, by the time this retrospective is done, you will want Mark to never mention trains again. The game with Moriarty begins. Sherlock and John go to investigate 221C, and Moriarty gives Sherlock a call.
Hello. Sexy, I've sent you a little puzzle. Just to say hi.
So this whole thing is like very elaborate foreplay then? In this episode, we see John worrying for the first time that Sherlock might actually be as heartless as he pretends to be. And that seems to go hand in hand with his concern about Sherlock's fascination with Moriarty.
The only mystery is this. Why is my brother so determined to bore me when somebody else is being so delightfully interesting?
Try and remember there's a woman who might die.
What for? Hospital's full of people dying, Doctor. Why don't you go and cry by their bedside and see what good it does them?
This is more clever character work. Sherlock is focusing on what he can do to save the hostage instead of getting upset about it or getting distracted by what Mycroft wants. But the framing makes him look cold for doing so because he's enjoying the game. And who should turn up just then but Molly and her new boyfriend, Jim.
Hi. So you're Sherlock Holmes.
Gay.
Sorry, what?
Nothing, hey.
Hey. Bye. It was nice to meet you.
Things Moriarty has done so far this episode. Blow up a building immediately after he saw Sherlock sadly pining out of a window after John, lovingly recreate a clue from the first case where Sherlock heard his name, call Sherlock sexy, set up a case to let Sherlock know he's known about him almost their entire lives, and show up at his place of work to pretend to be gay and flirt with him. We then get the infamous conversation about how gay it is to be well-groomed.
Sherlock.
He's not gay. Why'd you have to spoil? He's not.
With that level of personal grooming?
Because he puts a bit of product in his hair. I put product in my hair.
Wash your hair, there's a difference.
Really, Sherlock, you say that, looking like you look, dressing like you dress, and you don't see any contradictions? I can only assume that's because he considers himself proof of the theory. Sherlock seems genuinely shocked Molly is upset.
Charming, well done.
Just saving her time, isn't that kinder?
Kinda, no. Sherlock, that wasn't kind.
He thought he was being kind by telling her that the person she was interested in wasn't attracted to people of her gender. What might explain that? Moriarty calls Sherlock again and offers him a clue. Apparently because he's bored, but look at what he says.
We were made for each other, Sherlock.
And talk to me in your own voice.
Patience.
More romantic overtones. Because these two are being compared so heavily throughout this episode, it seems like you're meant to draw the same conclusions about both. That neither are really bored. That when they say bored, they mean they are romantically yearning. This comes up again, that Moriarty is only doing this for Sherlock.
Has it occurred to you that the bomber's playing a game with you? The envelope. Breaking into the other flat, the dead kid's shoes, it's all meant for you.
Yes, I know. Why are you doing this?
I like to watch you dance.
One of the hostages tries to describe the voice at the other end of the phone and is killed. The show offers two conflicting interpretations for Sherlock's motivations. The surface level one, that he's an unfeeling sociopath only in it for the fun of the game, and the one you have to be paying a bit more attention to see. You can see from his initial reaction when the call is cut off that he's devastated to not have spoken in time to save the old woman. It's the reason for his irritation the next morning. He's restless, constantly looking back down at the pink phone, eager to begin the next case and get it right this time. He bitterly mentions that he solved the case. That should have been enough to save those people.
Well, obviously I lost that round. Although technically I did solve the case, so...
But he's forcing himself to stay focused because he knows letting himself get upset will only make it more likely that he'll make a mistake in the next round. To get all of that, you have to be paying attention to Sherlock's actions, not his words. Again, that same technique the writers appear to be borrowing from the Holmes canon. John again asks what Moriarty is after, and Sherlock is seemingly a little too into the game for John's taste.
So why is he doing this then? Playing this game with you? Do you think he wants to be caught?
I think he wants to be distracted.
I hope you'll be very happy together.
The subtext of what John is worried about is finally made explicit as this blows up into a fight.
Sorry, what?
There are lives at stake, Sherlock. Actual human life. Just so I know, do you care about that at all?
Well, caring about them helps save them.
Nope.
Then I'll continue not to make that mistake.
And you find that easy, do you?
Yes, very.
The problem here is that Sherlock is still putting up the front, even with John, because he feels like it's necessary, that John will only be disappointed by who he really is. And after John's descriptions of him on his blog, he has every reason to be afraid of that.
I've disappointed you.
It's good. It's good deduction, yeah.
Don't make people into heroes, John. Heroes don't exist, and if they did, I wouldn't be one of them.
John, on the other hand, is terrified that Sherlock and the maniac blowing people up would actually be a perfect match. And what does that say about John? That Sherlock is the person who brought him back to life if Sherlock is a monster. The next clue comes, and Sherlock instantly dives back into his work. Initially, John doesn't want to help, and Sherlock points out that maybe his approach is the one that's actually doing more to help people.
Oh, you're angry with me, so you won't help. Not much cop, this caring lark.
John silently concedes the point and gets back to work. John eventually goes off to investigate the Andrew West case. And like the last episode, we get some focus here on a romantic partner, wondering where everything went wrong.
He didn't steal those things, Mr. Watson.
I knew Westy was a good man. He was my good man.
Again, it's an interesting parallel to what's going on with John and Sherlock. John wondering if Sherlock is a good man too. When they meet up again, Sherlock takes a moment to point out the unrealistically brilliant stars.
Beautiful, isn't it?
I thought you didn't care about things like
Doesn't
that.
mean I can't appreciate it.
Not only is that line straight out of a rom-com, but it seems like a conscious effort on Sherlock's part to show his humanity, that in spite of what he said before, he does care. Sherlock successfully solves the next case, and Sherlock and John share a moment of relief. One of my favorite lines on the show comes from this bit towards the end of the Andrew West case.
How long have you been following me?
Since the start.
I've always loved the implications of that line, that John fell first, but Sherlock wasn't far behind him. Speaking of the Andrew West case, the killer there turns out to be a brother, caught up over his head.
I don't know how it started. I just got out of my depth. I owe people thousands. Serious people.
Which you could read as a mirror for Mycroft. And of course, his cover-up involves trains. Mark and his trains.
Distraction over, the game continues.
Well, maybe that's over too. We've heard nothing from the bondman.
5 pips, remember, John? It's a countdown. We've only had 4.
After that final pip, John seems to have overcome the worst of his fears about Sherlock actually being heartless, and the two have a bit of a domestic moment back at Baker Street. But of course, he still leaves to go visit Sarah. And here Sherlock is deliberately keeping John out of his plans.
You given Mycroft the memory stick yet?
Yep. He was over the moon. Threatened me with a knighthood. Again.
And I think the next scene will make a good case for that partially being out of concern for John's safety. He lied about giving the memory stick back to Mycroft. He still has it, because he thinks that's what Moriarty is after, and arranges to meet with him. Which raises a question. Does Mycroft really just never ask about the memory stick again? Throughout the episode, he has been rather insistent about getting the plans back.
You've got to find those plans, Sherlock. Don't make me order you.
Text from your brother.
Delete it.
Delete it? Mycroft thinks there is. He's texted you 8 times.
It's your brother. He's texting me now.
Is this a glaring plot hole? Or is it a sign that Mycroft was only insisting Sherlock take the case at someone else's request? Another brother caught up with serious people. Sherlock arrives at the pool, and who is there to confront him but John himself?
This is a turn-up, isn't it, Sherlock?
John.
What the hell? Bet you never saw this coming.
Sherlock's reaction here answers the question of whether or not he's as heartless as he pretends to be with a resounding no. Sherlock is shaken by the possibility that John might be working against him, and it only gets worse when Moriarty reveals he has John covered in explosives. And what exactly is Moriarty's next taunt?
What would you like me to make him say next?
The villain having John strapped in explosives, explicitly because he knows that's the best way to hurt Sherlock, asks Sherlock if there's anything he particularly wants to hear John say. That seems to have some implications. Moriarty reveals himself to be Gay Jim from earlier, and the flirting continues.
I gave you my number. I told you my call. Is that a British Army Browning L9A1 in your pocket? Or are you just pleased to see me?
Both.
But the flirting's over, Sherlock. Daddy's had enough now. So take this as a friendly warning, my dear. This little game of ours, playing Jim from IT, playing gay. Did you like the little touch with the underwear?
Reading his attraction to Sherlock as genuine makes the most sense of his actions. Sherlock tries to offer Moriarty the memory stick, but that wasn't what he was after. John uses the opportunity to sacrifice himself to save Sherlock. Of course, Sherlock doesn't leave, and Moriarty points out that John's attempt at self-sacrifice was rather revealing.
You've rather shown your hand there, Dr. Watson. Gotcha.
And then we get the heavy hitter of the episode.
I will burn you. I will burn the heart out of you.
This is just such an interesting dynamic to set up, that the central conflict is going to be about Sherlock's heart, that the villain is threatening to destroy the heart he doesn't want to be there, the one Sherlock pretends he doesn't have. But Moriarty knows better.
I have been reliably informed that I don't have one.
But we both know that's not quite true.
He's already used that knowledge to threaten the person Sherlock cares about, loves the most, John. And the reverse is also true. The best way to hurt John is to threaten Sherlock. We saw Moriarty use that against him, too. Moriarty leaves, and Sherlock's immediate priority is making sure John is safe.
All right. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. Sherlock. Sherlock!
When Stephen Moffat mentioned the one time in canon you really see the affection between Holmes and Watson, he was referring to the adventure of the three Garadebs, the one and only time Watson sees Holmes' great heart.
The mere fact that I think that a proper active genius, he allows one in the whole 60-story canon, he allows one moment of genuine affection between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. We always know it's there.
Yeah.
There's one moment in the three Garadebs.
If
where
you've hurt my
Holmes
Watson.
for a moment. Yes, you've hurt my Watson. And that's it.
Yeah.
BBC Sherlock has two moments that currently hit that emotional beat. This, and a later scene where someone stuffs John into a fire. You know, I will burn the heart out of you.
John!
John!
John.
It seemed like a setup for a third and final Garadebs moment, the true moment of revelation. And boy oh boy did we get a Garadebs scene in Series 4!
I'm going to apply some context to your deductions.
I'm bringing it up now to remind you that this connection didn't come out of nowhere. The show really does set up this connection between John learning about Sherlock's heart and references to three Garadebs.
That thing that you did that you offered to do, that was good.
John, probably thinking that if Moriarty noticed his feelings for Sherlock, Sherlock must certainly know them too, deflects his gratitude with a joke about how someone might see them and think they were in a romantic relationship.
I'm glad no one saw that.
Hmm?
You ripping my clothes off in a darkened swimming pool, people might talk.
Be with you, little else.
You can see John is visibly wearing a mic here, so the best way to make sense of Moriarty's decision to come back here is that he overheard that joke and got jealous. Otherwise, it's just a random moment on Moriarty's part. Sherlock and John silently agree that they're willing to die if it means stopping Moriarty, and we end the series on a cliffhanger. The writers have said that they didn't know if they were going to be able to make more after this first series. So, thematically, leaving Sherlock and John locked in this moment, not knowing if they'll be able to escape Moriarty, well, that has fascinating implications. But as we all know, they did get to make more, and we will be picking up from this cliffhanger in part 3. For now, let's recap what we've gone over in this section. BBC Sherlock is a show that asks questions about the way we read the Holmes stories, how much of what we believe is actually true, and how much of it is the audience accepting the simplest explanation without any attempt to examine all the facts. These questions are at the heart of the narrative. They underpin and explain every other choice, from the ways they explicitly come up in dialogue to the way the conflicts all seem to center about who these characters really are. The writers even present the correct answers, if you're looking for them, but they're always hidden in a game of carefully timed contradictions, never letting you be sure for very long. The way some of the wrong conclusions, John being a useless sidekick and Sherlock being an unfeeling machine, are deliberately mocked by the show, presented in ways that highlight their absurdity, seems like another point in favor of the idea that these are questions the writers do intend to answer, that they are, in fact, writing the show to correct everyone else. And in only 3 episodes, we've gone from John and Sherlock as two broken strangers to two men who will prioritize each other above all else, to the point that the villain has already picked up on it and is using this against them. At the very least, this is another question the show is asking. Why do Sherlock and John need each other? What is motivating them to take the extreme lengths they do for one another? Could it be love? And maybe this is just a question that they raise for its own sake, an idea they think is fun to play with, hint at, but never confirm. But I don't think it's unreasonable to look at the way the same techniques that are being used to reveal the truth about Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are also being used to examine the nature of their relationship and wonder if the writers might have had something to say about that too. We'll see in the next episode that it certainly seems like they do. Until then, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back for Series 2.